Can Florida State win with DJU, or do we inherit damaged goods? This is going to be our quarterback preview that I promise you guys are not going to want to miss. We're going to go do a deep dive on DJU and why we think he can be what Florida State needs, we think he can help Florida State get where they want to go and have his best season yet. If you guys aren't convinced after this preview that DJ can be the guy, you probably never will unless he's holding up a trophy. And that's what we're hoping he can do. So I'm excited to get in this one. Probably went a little bit more in depth than we should have, but I know you guys are going to enjoy it. So, Michael, how are you, my friend? And are you excited to talk about some quarterbacks today?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and love this conversation. It's about time that we stop talking about off the field stuff and get on the field. And DJU is the great subject to start with. Like, can he win? Are the prognosticators right? Is he damaged goods, or is he actually a quarterback that can help Florida State lift a trophy at the end of the season? Let's get into it, man.
And that's the thing, man. That's why we went a little bit more in depth on this than we normally do, because there is a lot of that kind of back and forth that surrounds DJ. You know, this was a little bit of a controversial take whenever we got DJ from the portal. It really feels like, you know, this is a name that's known nationwide from his time at Clemson and Oregon State, mostly the time at Clemson for one reason or another. Right. And it really seems like people are split on this. And it seems like you either believe in what DJ can be, or you just think he's terrible. And so we're going to kind of get into why we think there's maybe some other factors, and maybe DJ's better than people give him credit for. So I know you guys are going to enjoy this one, and it's going to be a little bit in depth. So, you know, maybe grab a hot coffee or a cold beverage and lock in for this one, but you guys are going to enjoy it. I will say we are going to use some slides with some stats on it. We're not going to bore you completely with a bunch of stats, but if you are listening on the audio only version, we'll make it make sense. We're also going to do some comparisons to a couple of guys, especially Jordan Travis from last year. That's not to say that one quarterback is better than the other. It's just mostly to say that Jordan Travis, what he did for this program the last 2 years, he is one of the cornerstones of why Florida State has returned to the success that it has. And so I think it's a good comparison to draw from. Also, with that being said, I think it is important to remind people that at the end of last year, with JT off to the NFL and with Tate entering the portal, we had to take a quarterback. We only had two guys at the time. You had Brock, and then you had Luke, who was committed, but not even really on. Well, I guess he was on the team because he was an early enrollee. He was there for the Orange Bowl practice anyway. But we only had two guys, so you had to take someone. So they were able to go out and get a very experienced guy, kind of to follow the lead, take the baton from Jordan Travis, if I may. And so that's what we're going to get into, deep dive into DJ. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the rest of the guys in the quarterback room because, hey, we had to find out everybody in the quarterback room last year pretty much got a chance to play. So before we jump in, I just want to bring you guys a quick word from today's sponsor, and it is a new one that I know you guys are going to like, and that is our friends over at Autograph. They have an app that I sum it up like this, Michael. This is like the famous Jalen Ramsey quote. If you're a sports fan and you don't have this app, what are you doing? I mean, they got all the content that you want, college football, NFL, NBA, MLB. They got all your teams covered. They put it all in one convenient app. So you don't have to go looking around different sites and all that type of stuff, different social media sites, just to try and find the content you like. Now, it's from the free sites. I have to say that. They can't get behind the paywall, but we're on there too. So make sure you check that out. Not only do they have the content you want in one easy-to-find place, they reward you for doing what you're doing right now. The more you consume, the more coins you earn, and you can cash that in for chances to win discounted tickets and merchandise. So go check those guys out at you can either find it on your App Store and use code SPEAR to sign up, or of course I'll link it below to make it easy on you guys. So with that being said, let's get into DJ. We're going to kind of go in sections here. We're going to talk a little bit about who he is, a little bit about his career, and then why we think he can be that guy for Florida State. And, you know, I've said, I made a video a few months before he even committed why I thought DJ could be the answer for FSU. And the more that I've looked into it, the more I feel confident in the things that I said in that video. And because, you know, that was a controversial time. That was when it was Cam Ward or DJ.
That's right.
And everybody was either on one side or the other.
That's right.
So when we talk about DJ, I think when you look at him overall as a player, I think this is a guy that comes in with a high floor. Now, I know he hasn't performed up to his rating coming out of high school and all that stuff, but we've still seen him produce on a pretty fairly good level after that first kind of season where he really struggled. And we'll get into that in just a second. But I think when you look at his ceiling, let's be honest. I mean, he's failed to live up to that hype. He has not really reached his full potential. But if he does, I mean, this guy has all the attributes and tools that you want. Just look at coming out of high school. And again, high school ratings are not always 100% correct. But this was a consensus 5-star, number 2 player nationally, number 1 pro style quarterback with a 101 rating. He was actually ranked above CJ Stroud and Carson Beck in the same class and carried a higher player rating than Jameis Winston. So you can see that potential is there, right? And so let's talk about a little bit of the good and the bad of what we've seen throughout his career. So when you look at the good stuff, you got a guy who comes in with experience, redshirt senior over with 40 Power 5 starts. That's huge. I mean, Mike Norvell, when we talked about this at ACC Media Days, he said, look, you can't replicate experience in practice. That's only what you can get in games. So he loves the experience. And he also acknowledges that it's some good experience and some bad experience. What he actually likes that because he feels like he's won at the highest level. He's also had to pick himself up off the mat. And anytime it's been like that, you know, you kind of come in with that more humble, ready to work attitude. And I think that's something that we have seen from DJ so far since he's been at FSU is that kind of very much, let me just make the guys around me better. Let me lead by example. Let me just put my head down and work. And so I like the mentality. We've already seen him display some leadership qualities with turning down ACC Media Days and things like that. But he's got over 2,600 snaps of experience. Again, that's 2,500 more than Brock Glenn. So you just can't replicate that. And in those 40 Power 5 starts, he has a 30-10 record. So he's won pretty much everywhere he's been. Now, another quality that I really like is 6'4", 252. And now, look, I know Miami fans like to say you got a defensive end playing quarterback, but last time he played you guys, he ran all over your defense. So,
that's right.
you can't stop a defensive end, can't take a knee, whatever. That's neither here nor there. I guarantee you DJ can run victory formation. So I think that big size does allow him to see over the defense. And I think that's important. But, JT was a little bit of a shorter guy. That's right. Then you also see where that big size makes him hard to bring down because he will be part of the run game. When you look at that, another quality that we like of his is that dual threat ability. He ran the ball over 100 times in each of the past 2 seasons that he was at Clemson, another 68 times at Oregon State. So he's going to be a guy that's going to be involved in the run game. And that size makes him harder to bring down because now he's not an electric, shifty runner like JT was, but when he gets an open field with that stride or speed, being 6'4", he's probably a little faster than you think he is when I went back and watched his film, and it makes him hard to bring down. Give me that 6'4", 252 on 3rd and short, and I think we're going to be good to go. And he also has one of the strongest arms in college football, so that's exciting as well. I was reading something the other day on his high school camps, and they said that he was throwing the ball 80 yards in high school. So, that's a cannon. And I also like the size for the durability issue because, we saw a lot of times last year where JT was just beat up and he couldn't run the ball because he was playing injured. So hopefully DJU and his size will lead to availability, which is the best ability.
That's right.
Right. So now to look at a little bit of the knocks on DJ. He's got a little bit of a long, slower release. And at times he has poor footwork. He kind of just stops moving his feet, kind of throws off base a little bit at times. Accuracy and inconsistency have been the biggest issues that he's had throughout his career. And like we touched on before, he is yet to fulfill that high level of hype coming out of high school. Now, to kind of couch that a little bit, he has had 3 offensive coordinators in the past 3 years. Coming to FSU, that will be number 4 in 4 years. And that's obviously difficult on anybody. But we have seen him pick those systems up relatively quick, going out to Oregon State and having a good season. And I think, and I'll kick it back to you on this, but I think what really excites me about this is when we talk about the good and the bad, is the good qualities like size, strong arm, and dual threat ability. You can't teach those. No. Those are God-given abilities. When you look at some of the bad things, bad technique, long slow release, poor footwork, accuracy issues, those are things that are fixable to a degree, not wholeheartedly fixable, but to a degree, those can be fixed. And that's something that Mike Norvell talked about in an interview on ACC Network when Mark Richt asked him, what are they doing with DJU mechanics wise? And he said, we don't really work up high. Once a guy has developed that throwing motion, that's kind of what it is. But you can fix that footwork. And if you can get him to improve that footwork, so along with that, the accuracy will improve. And they also want to get him to be able to make quicker reads. If you can get him to get the ball out faster, then that long, slow release isn't as much of an issue. So they're going to do some things. And I think they're probably not going to look for wholesale changes. They talked about that, but sometimes little changes can lead to big improvements, and I think that's what we're going to see with DJ. So I'll kick it to you and let you share some thoughts on just some of the good and bad of DJU and kind of what that high ceiling versus high floor type of guy.
Yeah, I mean, DJ has naturally been that. That's been kind of the moniker of his whole career. Like you said, he came out of high school. He was highly rated. He was highly rated than some of the guys that are currently in the NFL that had great seasons, like CJ Stroud at Ohio State, Carson Beck, who's currently at Georgia and a Heisman front runner, and then of course famous Jameis. Like he had a better high school rating than famous Jameis when Jameis came out, and we all believe that Jameis probably should have started over EJ Manuel in the first place, but that's neither here or there. And so you saw flashes of that, especially when he came into the 2020 season against Notre Dame. You saw flashes of man, okay, this is the heir apparent to Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And then you saw the lows where it was really hard and he wasn't making accurate throws and costing Clemson some games, and so to speak. And then finally he goes to Oregon State and he kind of has a bounce back year there. He's getting better. But also you still see some of those flashes of inconsistency and struggling with the accuracy and things like that show up as well. And so, is there this Jekyll and Hyde kind ofness to DJ? Yeah, maybe. But I also think that part of that has been the fact that, like you said, he's going on, coming to Florida State. This is his fourth offensive coordinator. He's at 3 in the previous years that he was there. He also, probably didn't have the best talent around him at some point. And that's crazy to say because we're talking about Clemson here, who has been a juggernaut of recruiting and winning, the last, almost 10 years. And so to say that he didn't have the right kind of talent around him is crazy, but it's true. There's a difference in wide receiver, difference in offensive line, all those things that have kind of led into some of the factors. And I'll say this, and I'll pass it back to you, is that is there some responsibility of his Jekyll and Hyde on DJ himself? Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
He has to own that. He probably wasn't as excited. He probably lost confidence in the coaches. He probably lost confidence in the scheme. And therefore, he probably also didn't put his best foot forward as well, too. So, yeah, there's ups and downs to him. But as we're going to talk about, we think that in the right system with the right coaches, some of this can actually get better.
Right. And I think you make a good point that a lot of the onus is on DJ. And I mean, we're not going to beat around the bush with that. I mean, the bad season that he had in 2021 was on him. But
that's right.
We think that there's some other external factors that lead into that. And when you talk about talent, we're going to get into that as well. Clemson has always been a team that's been loaded on defense.
That's right.
But there's been some belief, and we're going to talk about this later in the show, that maybe was a little bit on the offensive side that has not been up to par for the Clemson that we've known the past few years. So let's do a quick run through of his seasons just to kind of paint the picture of where he started to where he's at. And again, before I pop the slide up, I think we have to start with that 2020 season. He played in 2 games as a true freshman and had 2 massive games as a true freshman. And that's why everyone was like, oh, man, this is the second coming of Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence. And so when you look at those 2 games in 2020 was against Notre Dame and Boston College, he put up 835 all-purpose yards and 6 touchdowns in only 2 games. I mean, those are ridiculously impressive numbers. Even against Notre Dame, 439 passing yards, against the Notre Dame defense that only gave up 300-plus yards in one other game, which was to Trevor Lawrence at the second time they played. And that is still the record for the most pass yards given up by a Notre Dame defense in school history. And I'm going to say this, Michael. Notre Dame been playing football for a long time. So for DJ to hold that record is still pretty impressive. But when we go through the seasons where he was a full-time starter, again, you look at that 2021 season and it just wasn't great. 55.6% completion percentage. And then he had 9 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. That just wasn't great. Only 4 games above 200 yards, 5 games with under a 50% completion percentage. He did add another 308 yards and 4 touchdowns on the ground, but he also had 9 fumbles. So it was a rough year for him. And that's not to say the guys can't have bad years. I think this was kind of a shock to the system for Clemson fans to see that happen. But then in 2022, he did have a bit of a rebound year. Completion percentage, yards per attempt, touchdowns all went up. Interceptions came down. You see, he had a 61.9% completion percentage, 2,521 yards, 22 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So much better stats across the board. He also added another 545 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. And really some notable games there. He torched Wake Forest, 371 yards and 5 touchdowns in a double overtime win. Granted, Wake Forest's pass defense isn't that great, but still 371 yards and 5 touchdowns. I mean, that's slinging it. Then, of course, we remember the game that we all kind of want to forget, the one in Tallahassee, where he comes in, throws for 3 touchdowns, 203 yards, and beat Florida State in Doak Campbell. Now, the reason I bring that up is because we talk a lot about how Wake Forest defense was bad. Well, Florida State had the number 4 pass defense that year, so they were pretty darn good. Right. And then, of course, the game that I can't pass by without bringing up, 322 all-purpose yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 30-point blowout over Miami. So shout out to you, DJU, for that one. Pick on our quarterback all you want, but he kind of tore y'all up. So when you look at that 2022 season, and just to kind of pop the slide back up here, when you look at that 2022 season, some of the things that really stood out for me in this was he had 2 really bad games at the end of the season, which was the final 2 games. And really one of them was the UNC game that I think he only had 5 passing attempts before they benched him for Cade Klubnik. And also the South Carolina game was really bad. Yeah. But when you look at the first 11 games of the season for DJ, his completion percentage was 65.3% with 8 games over 60%. Yeah. So I'm not really sure what happened in those last 2 games, but the first 11 games were pretty darn good. And then, we talked about in 2021, he only had 4 games above 200 yards. Well, in 2022, he only had 4 games under 200 yards. So again, you see the progression start to get better. And that's not counting UNC because he didn't really play. And there was 4 top 25 pass defenses that he faced that year. So again, it was against pretty decent competition. Now, 2023, he goes out west to Oregon State, has one of his better seasons, not maybe a little bit more efficient. The completion percentage did take a hit, which we're going to talk about that in a second, but goes 57%, 57.1% completion percentage, 2,638 yards, 21 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So the production pretty much stayed in line. The touchdown came down by 1, but everything else was in line. Really, the only part you can fault here is that completion percentage. And we have some thoughts on that coming up in just a minute. But he only had 3 games under 200 yards. One was against an FCS team, and one was at 198. So, again, continuous progression. That's what we're looking for. And I will say when he was out there, he did have 2 multi-interception games. And I went back and watched the film, and 2 of those interceptions in those games were tip passes. And, that's not exactly on the quarterback. There was another one where he kind of got decleated while he was throwing that got picked off. So, again, that's not all on the quarterback. And then he also added 219 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. And the bright spot last season was the game against ACC newcomer Cal, who is on our schedule this year. DJ had a 76% completion percentage, 289 all-purpose yards, and 5 passing touchdowns. So you do that against Cal, we'll be better off this year. Now, to talk about that 2023 season, I think a lot of people will kind of wash that away by saying, oh, well, it was against easier defenses out in the Pac-12. And that's a pretty fair argument. He did only face 1 top 25 passing defense, and it was a non-Power 5 team last year. Yeah. So it was an easier slate of defenses. You had 4 passing defenses that ranked outside of the top 100. But you kind of got to have that like chicken or the egg conversation here where you look at the Pac-12 had 4 of the top 5 passing offenses in 2023. So were those bad defenses a product of facing really good passing offenses? Right. It kind of you just have to factor all that in. But like we said, in 2022, he did face 4 top 25 passing defenses. So he has faced the tougher competition. And I just think a lot of it, when you look at that, yeah, the defenses may have been easier out in the Pac-12, but I think it was also a little bit more quarterback-friendly system, which we're going to get into here in just a second. But overall, man, I think the season, what you're looking for from DJ is just that continuous progression and getting better every year. And so far, I think he's done that. And I'll kick it back to you. But first, let's pull up some numbers to kind of show what we're talking about here with that progression. So looking at some of his career numbers that have gotten better, we'll start with QBR. And so in 2021, during that bad season, it was 43.2, 95th in the country. It's just not great. There's no way I'm not making no excuses for that. But in 2022, he takes a massive jump up to 64.4, 54th in the country. And in 2023, he takes another massive jump up to 80.8, 12th in the country. And just for context, when you look at Jordan Travis in 2021, he was 58th in QBR, then jumped all the way up to 7th. And then he had a little bit tougher year in 23, falling to 13th, one spot behind DJ. So we saw Jordan Travis make that big jump too. So we're hoping that DJ can continue to progress. And I did see something on social media the other day where someone projected QBRs for 2024. And I believe DJ was in the top 10 in projected QBR based on his history and the defenses he's going to face. So if he does that, I think we're going to be in good shape. Looking at passer rating, 2021, 108.7, 2022 up to 135.3, and then another jump in 2023 up to 145. So again, just paints that picture of how he's progressively gotten better throughout his career. Yards per attempt, which is a big quarterback stat, 6.0 in 2021, 6.8 in 2022, and then a big jump up to 8.3 in 2023. So again, just continuing that narrative that we're talking about. PFF grade here, which does take into account your running stats, your ball security stats, your passing stats, and gives you an overall grade, with 60 being about average. Slightly above average in 2021, 66.3, made a big jump in 2022 up to 79.6, and then a slightly smaller jump up to 82 in 2023. This next stat here, BTTR percentage, is big time throw rate. And that's basically a quarterback dropping it in a bucket at around 20 plus yards downfield. 4.5% in 2021, up to 5.7 in 2022, and then again up to 6.2 in 2023. And then you look at the pressure department here. So he took 20 sacks in 2021 and 2022, but in 2023, that sack number decreased to 11, and his pressure to sack percentage, which is how many times he was pressured that it turned into sacks, dropped from 18.9 down to 8.7. So he's got a lot more efficient in the pocket, which is something that I do really like from DJ as a quarterback. So I'll let you share some thoughts just on that career progression. But one thing that I do want to share before I kick it to you here is also one other thing is when in the ball security department, in 2021, he had 9 fumbles. In 2022, he had 8 fumbles. And in 2023, that number dropped all the way to 2. Now, he ran the ball less at Oregon State. But again, that ball security is something we know is big for Florida State and Mike Norvell. So I'm glad to see he's cleaned that up as well.
Yeah, I mean, you just see the progression that he's had there. Every year he's gotten better. And I think that has come with the clarity of offense, a clarity of what's expected of him, a clarity of the schemes that fit him better. And so you look at that, that 2022 season in Clemson, even though the offense and the skill set and all like that wasn't to his more specific liking, it got better for him after that, downfall of the 21 season. And then he goes to Oregon State and they run more under center, more NFL style, pro style, passing offense with a really complete run game. They had some decent backs there and he was able to continue to grow. Now his percentage of accuracy took a dip from that 22 season. But yet you saw the other progressions happen as well, too. You saw him get much better. I mean, he went from basically 62% completion rate to 57. And so there's some, there's still work to be done there. But also, too, I'll tell you this, Jesse. I mean, just look at the games DJU played in. I mean, at Clemson, he played in some high-level games. He played obviously against Notre Dame where he, threw the ball and at kind of like a coming out party for him, went crazy in 21 season. They ended up losing that game still. Then in 2021, when he's actually full-time starter, they played against Georgia and NC State and Pitt, lost all 3 of those games. You remember that Georgia game? It was like 10-3, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. I was there. That was a very boring game.
It was a very boring game. And he was 19 of 37 for 1 interception. I mean, so it wasn't like he has this experience, and yet a lot of the downfall, the angst that Clemson fans will talk about is in these big time games. But and so here's the thing: in 21, he threw over. He was 60% or above accuracy of 5 of the 13 games. So in 5. So he played 13 games, and only 5 of them was he above 60%. Then in 2022, that went up. He was over 60% accuracy in 8 of the 11 games that he played in. So you saw an increase of accuracy, and so maybe the offense fit him better. Maybe they called it a little bit better, and then he still ends up transferring. He goes to Oregon State. and in that 2022 season, he lost against Notre Dame again. So just so we know, our boy is 0-2 against Notre Dame, and we got to play Notre Dame this year.
Yeah.
So I'm a little worried about that game.
Redemption time, DJ.
Redemption time. Let's go. And then, of course, they lost the rivalry game to South Carolina. And then in 2023, they lose to Washington State, which, was Cam Ward. So, well, here we go. Redemption again. Arizona, which they had that insane quarterback there. Washington, as you know, played a national championship game. And then Oregon, which was really good. And, their only idiot loss was to Washington when they couldn't convert a fourth down. But in that season in 2023, he was only over 60% accuracy 4 of the 12 games that he played in there. And so you see just you see the growth, but you also see where the work still needs to be done.
Right. And I think it's fair to say that, because when you talk about DJU, I mean, look, if you expect DJU to be perfect and come out and throw for 70% completion percentage and 400 yards a game, newsflash, you're going to be disappointed. But that doesn't mean that he can't be serviceable. And so I think really now we can transition into, but I think you also make a real quick, I think you make a good point that a lot of the games that they have lost were against really good teams. That maybe it wasn't, some of it was on DJ, I'm sure, because, again, in that Georgia game, like you said, it was 10-3.
That's right.
Like I said, I was at that game in Charlotte, and it was kind of a snooze fest, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with good defense, but there was not a lot of scoring in that game. But I think it's also like, man, there are other aspects to why those games were lost. Some of it's on the defense. You look at Oregon State,
right.
Without having the scores in front of me, a lot of those were high scoring games where maybe they lost a shootout by 2 or 3 points sometimes. Yeah. And so I want to talk about, we're going to transition into why we think DJ can get better when he arrives in Tallahassee. But I think before we do that, I do want to spend just a quick second talking about that Clemson offense, because that's really the time where people really kind of pile on DJ for, right? And so, there's a lot of times in passing where I'll say things like, well, DJ criticized that offense, Dabo agreed, they fired the coordinator, blah, blah, blah. We move on, and we don't really look into what those comments said. So the other night when we were doing show prep, I was looking at some of those comments, and I thought it was really worth spending a few minutes on this, because I think it's pretty interesting to see some of these comments here. And so to start with, what DJ actually said in an interview with The Athletic was that the offense was basic, it failed to play to his strengths, and was very timid with play calling. Now, keep in mind, the 2022 offense was Brandon Streeter, and he was only offensive coordinator for 1 year, and then they ended up firing him. Before that, it was Tony Elliott. But just to kind of put some of the buzzwords from what I saw when I was looking at some of these comments on that Clemson offense. And if you're a Clemson fan and you're watching this, listen, don't get mad at me. This is what your beat writer said about your offense. This is not my opinion. But I think, being that it's people that actually cover Clemson, it's interesting to hear some of the things they say, because is part of the onus on DJ like we've talked about? Yes, of course it is. But it doesn't sound like it's all on DJ. And so when you look at SB Nation, which was the article that I read that had these comments in it, the writer of that article for SB Nation says that they think DJ was right, and he was not the only one making those comments, but he did question a little bit of whether it was a trust factor issue with DJ, and that's fair. But that doesn't mean the offense wasn't great and DJ wasn't great in the offense at the same time. Like you always like to say, Michael, two things can be true at the same time. And so some of the other comments that I have here that he said was, many have said that Clemson's offensive system was in a bad way for a few years, and that it was common for them to refrain from calling the good plays to keep them for the most important games. And they said that perhaps that was true with a different staff, but in 2022, it looks like that offense just didn't have it. The Athletic, Bruce Feldman wrote on an article describing how Clemson's offense had become predictable and stagnant by 2021. Guess who took over in 2021? That would be DJ. Greenville Online described the 2022 offense as stagnant, non-imaginative, and devoid of a downfield passing threat. Sports Illustrated noted that Clemson's inability to produce NFL caliber offensive linemen, unique among title contenders, left the Tigers extremely reliant on quarterback and receiver play, and also talked about how they lacked an identity on offense and were very lucky that they hit on Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson back to back. And that ties into what Dan Orlovsky, and this is a guy that knows a thing or two about bad offenses. I think he's been on like both teams in the NFL that went 0-16.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much his opinion's worth, but he knows a thing or two about bad offense. But he said that he thought the scheme at Clemson actually held Trevor Lawrence back. And he also said when you have generational quarterbacks and some superstar wide receivers with one of the best running backs in the history of the ACC, which I believe was ETN, I think, said that they cover a lot of stuff up. And the belief was that the talent that they had, because like you said, man, they're still a talented team. I mean, they're still top 5 in the country about every year. Most of that's on defense.
Right.
It covers up a lot of deficiency in scheme. And so what they continue to talk about to round this out was they said that with the wide receiver days in the past and DJ not being able to meet the high expectations set by Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson and their other quarterbacks, things just kind of started to come off the rails, and the Tigers offense struggled to produce big plays for years now. And then he said that he thinks it's very possible that the comments that DJ made, Dabo agreed with a lot of that stuff. And again, that's why they fired Streeter and brought in Garrett Riley. And the guy even says in here, in an article that was written prior to the 2023 season, he said part of the reason he even got a job writing for that website was the Clemson offense. He was familiar with it because it was the same offense they ran in high school in 2015. So, I mean, again, that's not my words. That's Clemson beat writers' words. And so what I think is interesting to kind of put a bow on this part of the section is that it's not all DJ. It's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
And when you look at what they did in 2023, because new quarterback, it's a new offensive coordinator, Garrett Riley, who was a Broyles Award winner at TCU as an offensive coordinator. When you look at in 2022, Clemson threw the ball 34 times a game and averaged 232 yards a game. That same season at TCU, they threw it 30 times a game and averaged 262 yards a game. So then you go to 2023 at Clemson, they threw the ball more 37 times a game and averaged less yardage at 228 yards per game. So it just really kind of leads me to believe, like, is DJU a bust? Is Cade Klubnik a bust? Are some of the other quarterbacks that they've had behind them that didn't supplant these busts that transferred out? I mean, I can't think of all their names, but like a Chase Bryce and all these other guys that went and started other places. Were they bust too? Or is there a possibility that you hit on a few and there's maybe some other issues with that offense? I mean, we've seen Clemson since those championship year coordinators left. They've still been pretty good on defense, but as a whole, that program has slid down. And I think the offensive side is where you've seen most of the struggles versus the defense. And also, one other thing to touch on with that is when you look at the defense or the offensive line, DJ's good when he's kept clean, when he's given a clean pocket. But I know our friend over at Clemson Football Live, who covers, if you're a Clemson fan watching this, you're mad, go watch him. He'll shoot you straight. Go watch his channel. He'll tell you like it is. And he's hoping that Matt Luke coming in can fix that offensive line, because he told us when we went on his show that the offensive line was some of the struggles that they had there. And just looking at the pass blocking efficiency for Clemson since 2016 to 2023, without boring you with all the numbers, man, they were top 10 and top 5 for 2017 through 2020. Then in 2021, they dropped to 33rd, then 21st, then last year was 44th. And when you look at QB-owned pressures, which is how much of the pressure that the quarterback's responsible for, the numbers really didn't change. Actually, Trevor Lawrence in 2019 was significantly higher than what DJU was. So, I mean, I think that's interesting. So the offensive line basically got worse, even though the same responsibility was on the quarterback. And DJU was top 15 in quarterback pressures responsible for last year at Oregon State. So, and I did, for what it's worth, I did look it up. In 2021, when DJU took over, they had a new center, and they used 3 different guys at center that season. They had a new guard, and they had a new offensive tackle that allowed 26 pressures that season. Both tackles allowed 30 pressures combined in 2020. So obviously, again, not all of that was on DJ. And for reference, Florida State's pass block efficiency last year was tied for 18th, and Oregon State's was down at 35th. So you would think, we talk about this. Florida State's offensive line struggled to run block last year a little bit, but they've consistently been good at pass blocking. So I think if you put them behind a good pass blocking offensive line, man, I just don't think, when you look at the comments that were made by those Clemson beat writers, yes, DJU is probably a little bit responsible for that, but it's not all on DJ.
No, absolutely. It's not all on DJ. It's definitely has to do with the coaching that's been there, the players, the continue rotation of the offensive line, of them not being cohesive in that sense. And yeah, as you showed in the stats, like even adding a new offensive coordinator. I mean, you talk about Tony Elliott, you talk about Brandon Streeter, you talk about Garrett Riley. You see again, like the stats still are showing that the offense is not clicking as it used to be. Could it be that just Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson were generational talent? I mean, it's just like when after Jameis was gone, remember we had Evan Golson and Sean McGuire and James Blackman and DeAndre Francois, and the offense still wasn't the same when Jameis was running it. The offense wasn't the same when Chris Winkie was running it. The offense wasn't the same when Charlie Ward wasn't running it. And so that happens. You're going to see that takes that. The issue, though, is in all those different things, including with DJ, is the coaches, are they bringing cohesiveness to what they are trying to do? Are they helping DJ? Are they finding ways to call the kinds of plays that will highlight DJ's strength and not highlight his weaknesses? And I think that's part of the problem that we saw at Clemson, is that no, they were trying to fit players into their system and say, okay, you got to do it this way. It's not working. I don't care. Do it this way. Do it this way. The difference is, and we've talked about this before in previous shows, is the Norvell effect, is that Mike Norvell has said from the very beginning that the offense is built for playmakers. It's built around them. It's to highlight their strength. And so what you saw at Oregon State was a lot of that too. They actually leveraged more of what DJ was better at so that he could exhibit those strengths instead of a lot of what he wasn't. And I think Mike Norvell and Tony Turkratz and Alex Atkins will build that offense around DJ. You'll see a lot more of him using the deep ball, a lot more of him getting out on the run, a lot more of those short, really quick zinger passes, and probably will stay away from as much as possible the middle stuff, because that's where the accuracy issues come into play. Also, they've talked about this before. I think you mentioned this about Mike Norvell talking about this at the ACC Media Days, is that for DJ, it's not about working on that upper motion. It's really about working on the feet, on the fundamentals, on the mechanics of setting your feet right, getting the line of sight better, making sure you're throwing, getting more power to that front foot coming off that back foot. Those things help with the accuracy issues. And I think, again, you wonder, did a lot of that work happen at Clemson? And I'm not saying that they're terrible coaches and they don't develop their players, because they've proven that they have. Right. But you wonder if there was a premium placed on that to help his accuracy issues get better.
No, I think that's a good point. And again, that's not to dish on Clemson's coaches. It's just we've seen what Mike Norvell has done with quarterbacks. And before we get into the next part of the section of the show, which is the Norvell effect, I think that you bring up a couple of good points there. And, when you talk about what Jameis did and then all the quarterbacks after that, I mean, these were also guys that it's not that they were bad quarterbacks. They just weren't Jameis Winston. And Correct. The farther we got away from that title team, now we know the 2013 team was absolutely loaded. Every single player in the starting 22 got drafted, or played in the NFL. So the farther we got away from that, we realized, was it Jimbo or was it Jameis had that made the other one look good? And, again, you talk about scheme and talent. I mean, shout out to Jimbo doing less with more. You have a talented roster and you can't win games with it. So I think a lot of it is just, even look back to Auburn when they had Cam Newton and they won a national championship. And then I think went 2-10 like a couple years later. Season. So sometimes you just have a guy who is that daggone good that he carries the team. And then sometimes you also have a team that's just really good around them, which we're going to give you a great example of this later in the show, where you don't have to be a Heisman type of guy to win the national championship. But getting into the Norvell effect. Oh, and one other thing I did want to touch on, and this is going to be hearsay because I can't quantify this for sure. I do want to say that I did hear a little bit of where Dabo had instilled this thought process that we have the Clemson offense. And Clemson fans, if I'm wrong, you can correct me. But I do remember hearing talk about this where they run the Clemson offense. And when you come in, you adapt to the Clemson offense. Of course, you're allowed to bring your own, qualities here and there, but it's kind of what they do. And so I think that's a good point that you make. But getting into offensive minds, let's talk about one of the best in the game, and that's Mike Norvell. We know that this is a guy who can tailor his offense to the skill sets that he has at hand. We've seen him have good passing offenses. We've seen him have good rushing offenses. So he can do both. And so what's interesting to me is this comes back to that saying that it's like what is it, Michael? The unstoppable force meets immovable object.
Yeah.
So the thing that I think is going to be most interesting in 2024 is something's going to have to give here, right? We know DJ came out with all this hype and everything like that, but he has still not thrown for over 3,000 yards in a single season. Now, it's worth mentioning he did not play in any conference championship or bowls in the past 2 years. So, he didn't have that additional game to bring those stats up. I'm not thinking he would have made it either, even in playing the bowls. But so he hasn't thrown for 3,000 yards in a single season. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Mike Norvell has had 12 years as a head coach or offensive coordinator, and we're going to throw out 2020 because they only played 9 games. They didn't have a full 12-game season with a possibility of a bowl at the end. In the years that he's had a quarterback start the entire season for him, game 1 to the final game of the season, he has never had a quarterback throw for less than 3,000 yards. Not one time. He's had 8, and that's been 8 out of 11 seasons. And you could project where Jordan was at in that by the time he got hurt. If he had finished the season, he probably would have made it 9 out of 11. There was a couple years where they had to use split quarterbacks due to injury. 2021, Florida State. I mean, they could have let me or you play quarterback.
Yeah.
I think we were just trying to let anybody play quarterback who could be any good. It was pretty rough. But he's, again, man, that's every year he's had a consistent starter. They've thrown for over 3,000 yards. 2 of them have thrown for over 4,000 yards. 4 with over 30 touchdowns. So the thing is, like, these guys weren't 5 stars coming out of high school. This wasn't a CJ Stroud. This wasn't a Carson Beck. This was Riley Ferguson and Brady White. No offense to those guys, but I mean, look at the production that he got with them. And he's only had one quarterback with a sub 60% completion percentage, and it was at 59.9. And that guy threw for 3,800 yards and 30 touchdowns. I mean, if DJ throws for 38 and 30, I think we're going to be where we want to be, because that's not even counting rushing yards. So to me, again, I come back to something has to give. Either DJU is going to throw for over 3,000 the first time in his career, or Norvell's going to have a quarterback miss the mark for the first time in his career. And, we talk about this before. This has a lot to do with in 2021 when a lot of people wanted to fire Mike Norvell. And I said, look, man, I think you have to look at his history versus the current history. And I think that history tends to revert to the mean. So, if you have 12 years of history with Mike Norvell, 11 minus the 2020 season, where those quarterbacks threw for 3,000, and DJU hasn't thrown for 3,000 in only 3 years, I think the 3 is going to trend more towards the 12 than the 12 is going to trend towards the 3, if that makes sense. So I think that given Mike Norvell and Tony Tokar's history with quarterbacks in their offense, I mean, that's reason alone for me to believe that DJU is going to have a good season. And I think also what's interesting, too, is when you look at the stat sheet from a production standpoint, we have to understand that Mike Norvell has spent a lot of time building a team around DJ. So we're going to run the ball heavy because we think we have a good offensive line and a deep running back room this year. So I don't know that he's going to put up like 4,000 yards because we're going to be running the ball a lot, more than likely. We actually struggled to run the ball last year. It was his lowest per game rush amount throughout his entire career. And so I'm thinking we're going to trend forward this year. But if he can run the ball, he likes to run it. We only averaged 33 attempts a game last year. Clemson was actually the 20 times, the lowest amount he's run the ball in his history as a play caller. When he's good, they run the ball over 40 times a game. So you're going to see a lot of running. But I think DJU is set up to have his best season yet. And, we talked about this. You hinted at this earlier about the talent around him. Just when you look at things at Oregon State in the 247 talent composite last year, because they don't have 2024 out yet. So, hey, 247, we're only like a week away from the season. I'm going to need you guys to get on this. But Oregon State was 56 in 2023 in total team talent. And Clemson in 2022 was 5th in total team talent. So that tells you the team around DJ was much better. And that's going to be closer to what he's going to have in Tallahassee. Right. Last year, Florida State was 20th in the team talent rankings, and we know they had a lot of roster turnover, but it is worth mentioning that they do have a higher blue chip percentage in 2024. So again, the talent is there. And then just to touch on the receivers a little bit that he had in his past, because that's going to be a big part of what DJU can do this year and how he can be successful. It's going to really a lot of his success is going to be predicated on what the people do around him. We know drop passes have plagued Florida State the past few years. We've already heard about drop passes being an issue in fall camp and some incompletion issues. So it's going to be, I mean, if you gave him last year, you gave him those guys, you probably feel really good. This year, we just don't know what the receiver group's going to do. I mean, we're excited about some guys, but it's mostly on paper. So that's going to be a big part of it. But when you look at Oregon State, that was a productive group. They had one guy over 700, I think 2 guys over 400, and then another guy over 300. But from a raw talent perspective, because we know Florida State can do more with less with some of the 3-star guys that have done really well for us. But just from a raw perspective, their top 3 receiver targets were outside of the top 1,000 recruits nationally. So from a raw perspective, it wasn't the most talented group. And even more interesting, out of those top 3 targets, not a single one was over 6 foot tall.
Yeah.
And when you look at Florida State's receiver room, we know they have size and we know they have speed. There's about 9 guys who we expect could probably be realistic contributors this year. And every one of them are over 6 feet. Or at least they have 9 guys over 6 feet that could be contributors and a 6'6" tight end. So he's going to have size this year. Also, none of those guys at Oregon State had a over 50% contested catch rate. When you're a kind of a deep ball thrower like DJ and you have guys that aren't coming down consistently with contested catches, that hurts DJU as well. So, and then just a quick talk about the Clemson receivers. Now they had size there. I went and looked it up. They had a couple guys over 6'3" or something like that. But Clemson's wide receivers, they had 1,000-yard wide receiver in 8 out of the 10 years prior to DJU and 1 over 900. So basically 9 out of 10 years prior to DJU taking over. Ever since that transition happened, they've only had 1 receiver top 600 yards at 604 in the past 3 years. So again, the chicken and the egg question. Is it the quarterbacks? Is it the receivers? Is it a little bit of both? Did DJ play behind a worse offensive line with not quite the NFL caliber receivers? That's just something to think about. And so as we get into play concepts and the offense to kind of get towards the end of the show here, just give me some thoughts, man. What are you seeing when you think about that talent and what Norvell has done with those quarterbacks and how that can set DJ up for success on its own right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, Mike Norvell's history is shown, proof in the pudding, that he can take a quarterback and he can design an offense that will highlight that quarterback's strength. If they're a deep ball thrower, you're going to see a lot of big plays. If they're a short ball, the medium thrower, and they don't really have a great deep ball, you're going to see a lot of those gadget plays where, it's throwing out of the backfield, a lot of those bubble screens, wide receiver screens, halfback screens, a lot of those dig routes, a lot of those things like that. And so you're going to see him try to leverage what is the best thing these quarterbacks can do. And so again, he's going to put DJ in. You already heard that in the ACC media days. You heard that in preseason fall practices, that they're more and more beginning to trust him with more and more of the offense because they're seeing what his skill set is, how much he understands. I mean, this guy has over 2,600 snaps in his college football career, 40 starts. He's appeared in 48 total games. The guy knows college football. And so now you're not having to teach basic concepts. You're teaching more intricate concepts for him. Interesting. Yeah. You're teaching more complex concepts for him. And you're actually able to spend more time on those mechanics because he's got the concept down. Mike Norvell talked about how he not only understands the play itself, but he understands why this play is being called at this moment and what the defense is trying to do against that play. And that, for Mike, is like another coach on the field. I mean, you saw that with Jordan Travis, where he gave Jordan Travis free reign to orchestrate that offense. And so now he's beginning to get that same feel with Mike Norvell. Of course, also, what is key is that the talent at Florida State has only gotten better every single year. The talent has gotten better and better and better. Now, yes, last year you look at the offensive line, like you said, Mike Norvell loves to run the ball. I mean, you go all the way back to 2020, his first season there. Yeah, we had a 31st rushing offense in the country, and that was an absolutely atrocious team.
Then we had to run the ball because it's all we could do.
That's all we could do. Correct. And then in 2021, we took a dip and we went down to 52nd. But you know what? We were running it on people. We were running on Clemson. I mean, we went to Clemson, almost won that game. And then in 2022, we had the 13th ranked rushing offense in the country. It was insane. I mean, we were running all over
yards a game. Yeah.
Over 214 yards a game average. And then, of course, it took a dip. We also know that last year there was a lot of injury on the offensive line. There was some shuffling going on. We had counted on Robert Scott being one of the anchors there at right tackle. He did not barely played any of it. So we had the 76th ranked offense. DJU at Oregon State at the same time of last year had the 57th ranked offense. They had the 45th overall total offensive yards. So you know that if Mike Norvell can get him into the type of scheme with better players than he had at Oregon State, like he had at Clemson, go back to his 2022 season at Clemson, when he had the talent and he had the right scheme, you saw the best of DJU. And I think Mike Norvell is going to be able to bring that out of him.
Right. I think that's right. It's almost like what we're looking for is like the talent of Clemson and the scheme of Oregon State to kind of mesh those things together, which is something that he's kind of not had at the same time. And so I think you bring up a good point when you talk about play concepts. And I mean, first off, the key to play concepts is having a good running game. I mean,
that's right.
We know something to touch on what you said is DJU has said, look, they give you a lot of ownership in this offense. And so he has to be on that page to be that on-field coach. And, you know, maybe the in-helmet communications plays a part in that as well this year, too. But you need a good, strong running game to take the pressure off DJU. You know, there may be times where DJU needs to win a game for Florida State, but you don't want him to have to carry the team in every single game. And so looking at the scheme a little bit here, what he did at Oregon State, they put him in that more quarterback-friendly offense. Like you said, that more pro-style, NFL-style offense. Under center, you had some pistol formations. And I think you're going to see a lot of that at Florida State this year. I think you're going to see more pistol, more under center. You're going to see more two-back sets, which is something that he liked to run at Memphis with the running game. But when you look at what they did, they ran play action 37.4% of the time at Oregon State, compared to Clemson in 2022 at 28.8%. And when you look at his numbers, they were better with play action, 62.5% completion percentage, 11-2 touchdown to interception ratio. His pressure to sack percentage was much lower. Yards per attempt were higher. So for all intents and purposes, I mean, when you look at the play action, he has performed better in play action because we know play action is a quarterback's friend. It kind of freezes that defense while they decipher whether it's a run or a pass play, and it allows your playmakers to get in space. And when you watch the film, DJU is good at finding playmakers in space and distributing the ball. So, again, if we know that his numbers are better in play action, then we look at what Norvell has done throughout his career. He runs play action around 34% of the time, and he's only had one season under 30%, and it was above 29 or 28. So he's going to be in a quarterback-friendly system, and I think that's what's exciting to know that it's going to be in a system that's better for him. And so when we move on down the line, let's talk a little bit here about DJU's strengths and weaknesses as far as just looking back at some of his stats. And we're not going to bore you guys with a ton of stats because we know this episode is going to run a little bit long. But again, looking at some of these stats where DJU maybe gets criticized in some of the areas that we know. And to start, we'll start with one of his strengths. And that, of course, is the deep ball. This is half of why you brought DJ in. This is why you get excited here. So looking at his deep passing, which is over 20 yards, it got better from year 2 to year 3. A lot of that had to do with the drops decreasing. So he had better deep ball numbers than Jordan Travis did in 2023. And we know Jordan Travis did the deep ball was not his strength. So that's that's a fair argument to say to not expect him to do that. But you look at the completion percentage from 2022 to 2023, it did come up from 33.9 to 43.1. Now the drops dropped from 12.5% to 7.4%. So that helped DJ out a lot. Again, it's a lot about guys helping out their quarterback. And so when you look at JT in 2023, his numbers, his deep ball completion percentage was only 31%. And so now, goodness gracious, Michael, we dropped a lot of passes.
Yes, we did.
We dropped a lot of passes last year. Our drop percentage was 14.3%. So that killed JT's deep ball. But, we did have a lot of kind of throw it up and go get it type of offense last year. And so you're hoping we can spread the ball a little bit more evenly this year. Now, I think what is interesting to talk on a comparison standpoint is when you look at your deep ball stats, completion percentage and big time throw rate, these are on par with two of the best quarterbacks out there last year. So looking at DJU, his completion percentage was 43.1% in 2023. His big time throw rate was 27.7%. Compare that to Michael Penix last year, who was in the running for the Heisman. His was 43.6% and 27.6% on the big time throw rate. So DJU actually was only 0.5% less on the completion and a little bit higher on the big time throw rate. And the other guy that we talked about with Carson Beck, who is a Heisman frontrunner this year at Georgia, his deep ball completion percentage was 40.7%, and his big time throw rate was 27.1. So again, DJU is one of the best deep ball throwers in the country, and he's on par with some really good guys there. So, I mean, that's what you brought him in for. And I think we're going to see a lot of those deep shots opened up by the run game this year, pending that run game does what it's supposed to do. Now, looking at one of the areas where DJU gets the most heavily criticized, and that's his mid-range passing, which is 10 to 19 yards. Now, when you look at the numbers from 22 to 23, the completion percentage went up as the drops once again came down. So apparently Clemson had the drop problems too, like we did last year. But then you look at the touchdown to interception ratio did get worse. That's the big red flag here. But as I told you guys earlier, I went back and watched some film. A couple of those were tip passes. A couple of those were when he was being hit while he was thrown. Again, that's not to provide an excuse. That's to provide context. It's gonna have to get better. But I think what's interesting is when you look at the numbers compared to JT's, and again, this is not to say who's better or worse. It's just we're drawing from a comparison of a guy who was fifth in Heisman voting, and had he not got injured, probably would have been in New York and probably would have led his team into the playoffs and potentially a national championship.
Yep.
So looking at those numbers, though, in 2023, his completion percentage is 55.9%. JT's was 54.7. So he was actually had a higher completion percentage over those mid-range throws. Now, if you see this ADJ on here if you're watching on YouTube, that's adjusted completion percentage. So that is passes that were on target and accounts for drops and throwaways. So that's why I like that number a lot there. But again, like I said, and goodness, again, with Florida State, we dropped 7.8% of our passes last year compared to 3.7 for DJ. So again, I think the point is the touchdown to interception ratio has to be improved, but the completion percentage is on par with what we saw from Jordan Travis. And I think also you can take away from looking at 2022 that the touchdown to interception ratio was on par with JT. So he's shown you the ability that he can he can make these passes. And I think that's the same when we drop down to the short passing, which is 0 to 9 yards. Short passing numbers are still pretty good and on par with what Jordan Travis had. You know, Florida State, again, man, a lot of freaking drops. Florida State dropped 11.2% of their passes last year. But when you look at it, the completion percentage did drop a little bit, but that touchdown to interception ratio did get better, where he had a 73.8% completion percentage, 7 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. So again, I mean, I'm thinking that this was a good this was a good spot for DJU last year. And it's just on par with what JT's been able to do. So then the last section I want to talk about here is going to the behind the line of scrimmage throws. And I think this really has a lot to do with why DJ's completion percentage struggled last year. Because when you get into these numbers, this is where it got drugged down. First off, a sub 80% completion percentage on your behind the line scrimmage throws is bad. Actually, I looked it up on PFF. And of quarterbacks with a similar skill or similar workload, the same amount of passes, in the Power 5, this was actually the lowest one. Out of 62 quarterbacks, this was number 62. So this is something that he really struggled with last year. I don't know if maybe it's a little bit of a guy with a cannon for an arm having to learn to take something off of those short throws.
Yeah,
that's something that we've heard a little bit about in the fall camp so far. But that's something that's going to have to be worked on. But again, he also, to kind of paint you the whole picture, they were tied for the 6th highest drop percentage in the Power 5. So that has a lot to do with it. And I think the big takeaway of what you see here is in 2022 at Clemson, his behind the line throws, his completion percentage was 91.8 with a 3.7% drop percentage and an adjusted completion percentage of 95.3. So he's shown you the ability to make those throws. That drop percentage in 2023 climbed up to 8%. So that had a lot to do with it. And we know Jordan Travis, one of the most efficient quarterbacks in college football, was at 95.5% in 2023. So again, while that really drug his percentage down, that had a lot to do with drops. And maybe some of that's on DJ for throwing it a little too hard or maybe not on target. But he has shown you the ability to make these throws in the past. And I think when you look at his from top to bottom of the things we just talked about, we know he's one of the best deep ball throwers in the country. The mid-range numbers are not as bad as people make them out to be when you look at what Jordan Travis did comparatively. The short passing is on par where we need it to be. The behind the line has to get cleaned up. but he showed you the ability to do that before. And so I'm not as worried about it. I think that, like you said, they're going to call an offense that plays to his strengths more than not, but there's still some things to clean up.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see the work that needs to be done, and so you trust that Mike Norvell and Tony will be able to get him into the lab, as they say. And with the addition of the the non-recruiting coaching staff being able to coach and practice with these players now, the extra work's going to come. They're going to figure out a scheme to make sure that they highlight his strengths. Some of that behind the scrimmage throws, the screens, like I mentioned earlier, the wide receiver screens, the bubble screens, the halfback screens, even the tight end screens that Mike Norvell loves to run with the tight end faking and then going up the middle there. You're going to see a lot of that, I would assume, in this offense to help DJ kind of get more acclimated to that middle to throw range as well too. And I also would say is that the run game, as we've talked about over and over again, the run game is going to be huge help in that. It's going to take the pressure off of having to make a lot of those throws. And if you can have a consistent run game, then you could really use his strength where he's going to be hitting you over deep over top of those things. So I have confidence that Mike Norvell and them will be able to figure that out.
Yeah, and speaking of pressure, let's get into our last little bit of stat talk here. And again, we're going to try and make these stats relatively quick so you guys aren't glazing over on your eyes here. But I think one of the big things for me that we talked about before is pressured passing. And you just talked about the pressure on DJ. Well, here's the thing. If you can keep the pressure off of DJ, he's actually a pretty daggone good quarterback. And when you look at these numbers here against pressure or in a clean pocket, when you look at the kept clean percentage of snaps last year, dropbacks, it was 62.6%, which was much lower than he had at Clemson the year before at 74.3. So he faced a lot more pressure last year. 208 attempts, adjusted completion percentage of 72.6%, 1,953 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, with a turnover-worthy play rate of only 1.4%. That's pretty daggone good. I mean, you don't get much better than that. Jordan Travis last year was kept clean 72.3% of his dropbacks, 252 attempts, adjusted completion of 76.6, 2,300 yards, and a 16-1 touchdown to interception ratio with a turnover-worthy play percentage of 1.1%. So again, those numbers, when he's kept clean, are in line with some of the better quarterbacks. Yeah. When he's under pressure is where he struggles the most. Now, hey, guess what? That goes for every quarterback in the country. Every quarterback struggles. But if you can give DJ a clean pocket, I think he can be exactly what you need from a pocket passer. And that's something that Mike Norvell talked about when they asked how he was going to be involved in this run game. They said, how do you get him involved in this run game? And how do you practice that and keep him healthy at the same time? And Mike Norvell, his first thing was like, hey, look, man, we are excited about what he can do from the pocket. Now, of course, he's going to be a part of the run game. Right. But when you see if you can give him a clean pocket, and we talked about how Florida State's passing or pass blocking has been good, the numbers align with what he did in 2022 at Clemson as well. 74.3% of clean pocket passes, 2,191 yards, 18 touchdowns, 6 interceptions with a adjusted completion percentage of 78.6. If you give him a clean pocket, I mean, for all intents and purposes, he looks pretty daggone good. So I think, again, there's so much of this that's going to be built on what happens around DJ that determines his success. And so I think that takes us into our final segment on DJU here, and which is arguably the most important section of the show, and that is expectations. And so I think here's the thing about DJU. If you are asking the question, can DJ come in and win Florida State a national championship? You're asking the wrong question.
That's right.
The question needs to be, can DJU come in and help Florida State win a national championship? Because we know that Mike Norvell has spent the last few years building an entire roster in Tallahassee around him. We saw last year how when you lost one guy in Jordan Travis, that offense fell off a cliff. We had to start just doing sandlot plays to score points. I think this year, not only is the depth in your quarterback room better, but you're not on a team that's as dependent on one guy. We feel like you should be able to run the ball a little bit better this year. You should have more depth at the receiver. You may not have those top guys in a Keon and a Johnny and a Jaheim, but you have more guys to spread the ball out too. So we feel like it's going to be less dependent on one guy. And of course, like we talked about with the Heisman winners in the past, of course, really good quarterback play helps and it really elevates your team. It can make a bad team look great. But at the same time, I don't think DJU needs to have a Heisman winning season for Florida State to be good, for Florida State to win the ACC and to get into the playoffs because of the team that's built around him. Yeah. And if you want evidence for this, this is about as good as it gets, Michael.
Okay.
Look no further. This is like a science fair project or whatever. If you look at last year, this is the perfect case scenario. When you look at the guy that won the national championship and was drafted in the first round, and you look at the Heisman winning quarterback. And so first up, let's play a little game.
Okay.
Let's throw a slide up. And for those listening at home, I'll read it off so you know what we're talking about here. And if you've been paying attention, you probably already know who this guy is, who one of these guys is anyway. But let's look at quarterback A. And we're going to use regular season stats here because, like we said, DJU has never played in a conference championship or bowl game, at least started and played the whole thing. So we're going to go with regular season stats so it's a fair comparison. So quarterback A, 191 of 311, 2,483 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, 51 attempts on the ground, 181 yards, 3 touchdowns. Quarterback B, 180 of 315, 2,638 yards, 21 touchdowns, more than the other guy. A few more interceptions, but only by 3 with 7 interceptions, 68 attempts on the ground, 219 yards, 6 touchdowns. So you're talking about a guy here that put up more touchdowns and more yards. Which quarterback would you say produced better? Probably B, right?
Right.
Well, let's find out who they were. So quarterback A, look at quarterback A. That's JJ McCarthy, the guy that was I'm not going to say he led Michigan to a national championship. He was part of the team that won the national championship. Exactly. He helped get them to a national championship. Quarterback B is DJU. And so if you look at a guy who, we're giving you the numbers without the name on the jersey here, has produced at a level that a guy that won a national championship and got taken in the first round has, why would that not work for Florida State? And again, if you look even at one further with Jordan Travis, he got Florida State to 10-0. And so last year, a lot of people like to talk about, what DJU played in more games. But if you look at it, he had almost the same amount of all-purpose touches. Jordan Travis had 371 all-purpose touches last year for 3,034 yards, 27 total touchdowns, and 6 total turnovers. DJU had 369 total touches. So, I mean, we are right there. 2,896 yards, also 27 total touchdowns, and 9 total turnovers. So, DJU may not be as efficient as those two because JJ McCarthy did have a much higher completion percentage.
Right.
But overall, I mean, he's put up numbers that are similar to a guy that won a national championship and similar to a guy that got us to 10-0 and we believe could have won a national championship. So why wouldn't those numbers work for DJU? And I'll throw it back to you on this, but one other thing with him and not having that Heisman season, look at Jaden Daniels. 5,000 all-purpose yards and 50 total touchdowns. And what LSU do? They finished 3rd in the SEC West, didn't even sniff the conference title game. So it's not always about the guy producing the yards. It's about the team that's around him. And DJU has shown he's had good enough production. And, not to pile on Jimbo in this episode, but, back to the famous quote he says is the play don't care who makes it. Yeah. Well, the production don't care who produces it. It doesn't matter. As long as the production gets made, it doesn't matter who. And again, man, when you look back to JJ McCarthy, I think this is the perfect example of why it doesn't always have to be a quarterback-led offense that wins a national championship. I mean, no offense to JJ, but that was kind of some hot boo-boo there as far as quarterback play. I mean, you look across the entirety of a season, he only threw for over 300 yards in one game, under 200 yards in 7 games, did not throw for a single touchdown in 5 games, including the national championship. And then you look at what DJU did. I mean, he threw for and 2 games I want to touch on with JJ McCarthy. He went 8 of 13 for 143 and 3 picks versus Bowling Green.
Come on.
Versus Penn State, I had to look this up because I was like, did he get hurt or only play one quarter or something like that? Versus Penn State, he was 7 for 8 for 60 yards and no touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael, I'm not saying like, I'm not Uncle Rico, but I could probably get in there. I might could go. I might could go 7 of 8 for 60 and no touchdowns against Penn State.
Oh, Uncle Rico could do it all.
Exactly. So I might could get out there and sling the rock 8 times. I'll probably take 16 sacks in that because I'm not very athletic. But when you look at DJU last year, knowing those numbers, he only threw for under 200 yards in 3 games. Again, like we talked about, one was against an FCS, one was 198 yards. He threw for at least a touchdown in 11 out of 12 games, had multiple touchdowns in 6 out of 12 games. So, again, man, when you look at that, I think DJ has shown you that he can produce to a level that can lead to success. It just a lot depends on the team that's around him.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, here's the thing. And maybe this is not a fair comparison, but it just goes to show you that you look at somebody like Jaden Daniels, right? I mean, this other world talent was at Arizona State, basically forgotten, comes to LSU and blows up on the scene. And everybody recognized, oh, this guy was just misused. Look at him. He's throwing all over the field. It's great. Didn't even sniff a national championship. Florida State made sure of that. Right. But then you look at a JJ McCarty, who wasn't this other world talent, but had talent around him and was good enough to be a helpful part of that. They win a national championship. How about this? Let me give you some other arguments. Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, they all both won national titles. They were other world talents, but they also had great talent around them as well.
Yeah.
I mean, let's just go to the dynasty of dynasties. Let's look at Alabama, okay? You look at Alabama. AJ McCarron wasn't this other world talent, but he had great talent around him, right? You look at Jacob Croker, who we all lament should not have transferred from Florida State because maybe we win a title in 2015. But he goes to Alabama for his one season. He's not an other world talent. They win a national title. Why? Because he had great talent around them. I mean, I can keep going. Look at
Mac Jones.
Mac Jones, who got
I look like Mac Jones.
Right? I mean, he wasn't that. I mean, he got drafted and then, kind of flamed out in the NFL. He led them to a national title. How about this one? Bryce Young. Bryce Young was the epitome of generational talent to come out, play at Alabama. Bryce Young's dear friends actually went to the church I was a part of in California. So he's talking about it all the time. The dude won a Heisman Trophy. The dude got to the college football playoff, did not win a national title, right?
Yep.
Because the talent around him wasn't as good as they had normally been at Alabama. And so you look at this is now an opportunity. DJU coming into a place where now not only does he have the scheme that will fit him, he also now has the talent that will fit him. So who knows what he can do? I think he can do something great. I'm not saying he's going to win us a national title. I'm not saying that it's all going to be on him. I'm just saying that now he has the ability to go and add to what Mike Norvell and them have already been building around at Florida State.
Exactly. That's a great point. And I feel like, if he can just have a slightly better year than he did last year, I think that's good enough. And again, you make great points with that because a lot of people put DJU in a box and say, this is what he is. He can't get any better. And again, I'll remind you that we had a guy who basically put this team on his back a lot of times that a previous staff wouldn't even let throw the ball. His career didn't peak until his 5th and 6th year.
He wanted to quit.
Right. Jaden Daniels, another great example. A guy who, when he came over from LSU and we were scouting him, I was like, man, I don't know that I wouldn't start the other guy. The guy that I forget is Nussmeier or Garrett or whatever. When he came in and kind of torched Georgia secondary, I was like, man, you might want to go with him. And then he turns around and wins a Heisman the next year. So, but you look at LSU, the 81st ranked defense. Michigan had the 1st ranked defense.
That's right.
So Florida State last year, if you adjust for the bowl debacle, whatever you want to call that, we would have had a top 10 defense. So if Florida State has another good defense and another good running game, and Michigan's running game wasn't that great. It was like 55th in the country last year. So it doesn't have to be superb. But again, you just need a team that doesn't have to make DJ win every single game. Now, again, there may be a time where he does have to win us a game. But I think that with the improvement in this scheme with these coaches, I think he can do that. And so that's the last thing I want to touch on with DJ that I think he brings from an off the field perspective that we talked about, which leads us into the other guys in this room as we close out this episode, is the mentorship factor that he brings. Yeah. Again, this is a guy that's played in some really big games. Like you mentioned, he's played against the Notre Dames, the Florida States, the Oregons, the Washingtons. He's been in these big time environments at big time programs.
Yeah.
And so we know that, look, this sounds terrible to say. And I think that he can do more than just be this guy. But we know this Florida State quarterback room is loaded, especially when you look at 25 and 26 of who we still have coming in on top of that. DJU is, in all essences, a bridge guy. We need him to get us through 1 year so Brock can get some more seasoning because, he's missed a lot of time with injury throughout his very short career at Florida State. And I think he can provide DJU with all that experience and that veteran leadership. I think he can be a very good mentor for these young quarterbacks in this room. And I asked Mike Norvell about that at ACC Media Days. And he said the one thing that he loves about this quarterback room is that it's not guys competing against each other. It's guys competing with each other. And a lot of times you do see that where they just compete against each other. And so I think he's going to teach them a lot. And, I think back to where a lot of people really lamented the failed McKenzie Milton experiment. And I understand why Mike Norvell took him. If he was a shadow of himself, you got a great quarterback. And apparently he just was not. But that's not to pile on McKenzie Milton. But there was a lot of talk about what he did for Jordan Travis off the field and helping him prepare, helping him come out of his shell and be that true leader, and the things that went into being a quarterback that didn't involve game day. And so I think that that's what DJU can be for these young quarterbacks. And now as we transition into those young quarterbacks to close the episode out, if something were to happen with DJ, whether it be injury, hopefully not, knock on wood, whether it be underperformance, I think Florida State is at a better position at quarterback number 2 and maybe even quarterback number 3 if Luke can stay healthy than they were last year. And I mean, again, this is not intended to be a dish on Tate, right? But Tate was... You have to remember, Tate was Mike's first quarterback commit when Willie hadn't signed a quarterback in 2 years. So we had to get somebody. And that's not to say that he can't go to Southern Miss and do good there. But when you look at what he did at Florida State, you had the Louisville game, which was great. That had a lot to do with Burnt Toast Brownlee, shout out. Had the game circled and gave up a lot of yards. That also had a lot to do with Louisville's defensive coordinator. Could not figure out to stop putting Burnt Toast Brownlee in single coverage against a guy who's 6'7". It was like, dude, I mean, give the man some help, and they just wouldn't do it. So
I call better plays on Madden than that. Come on,
exactly. Now. So like, you give him credit for that game, but when you look at the Florida game, he just looked like a deer in the headlights. He did not look ready for the moment. And so I think it's just when you now to his credit, Florida State has not blown out a lot of teams in recent years. So you haven't had a chance to really get your 2 and your 3 quarterback in there. But I think when you look at what Brock brings as quarterback 2 this year, obviously this is a guy with a higher ceiling. He's more talented than Tate was. And I think he's also going to be a little more prepared this year. He wasn't ready for that. He should have never been in that situation. I know things happen. You always got to stay ready, but he missed time in the spring. He missed almost half the season with a hand injury after the Southern Miss game when he did get to play. And so I also think when you look at what Brock did in that ACC championship game, you had a situation where Mike Norvell was under the impression that you win and you're in. So we're not going to let the true freshman go out and lose us this game. They didn't really sling it a whole lot. And pretty much half the passes he threw, we dropped. And we already talked about drops on this team. I went back and watched the film. A lot of those passes were not on Brock Glenn. Those were on guys did not catch the ball. And so I think when you saw the transition into the Georgia game, although it was terrible experience, and Mike Norvell touched on that at ACC Media Days, like, hey, it ain't all good experience, but it's experience. You saw a completely different Brock Glenn. He aired it out. He was slinging that thing. I remember watching that game, as painful as it was, being like, man, if we have to roll with Brock Glenn next year, I'm okay with that.
I'm okay.
So, you see the moxie in the pocket of where he'll stand in there and deliver it, whether it means taking a shot or not. He's got true athleticism with his legs that he can make plays to where that can be a true weapon for Florida State. I just think with Brock, it's seeing that development. It's seeing him come along with another year in this offense, another year in this system. And so far through fall camp, we've heard that he's done very well.
Yeah,
it's just
that's right.
Being consistent, and staying healthy. I think that's the biggest questions for Brock. But I think the gap between QB1 and QB2 this year is a lot smaller, and that's not a dish on DJ or anything. I just think Brock's better at QB2, so you feel better if you have to go to QB2 in bringing Brock in. And then, of course, the guys behind them, and that could even go for underperformance for DJ. If things aren't going right, maybe you give Brock a look, because I think he's that good. I think with the time that he's missed, he's not going to take the starting spot, but he's good enough that DJ knows you can't slip up or there's someone nipping at your heels. And then before I throw it back to you, just on the younger guys, I think Luke Kromenhoek is one of the guys I'm most excited about in this quarterback room. I think he can do it all. His arm is great. We've heard about the throws he's been making in fall camp. It's just with Luke, we've actually heard he's been taking well to the offense. It's just adjusting to the speed of the college game and getting up to speed on this offense and being able to take control. Because like we said, a lot of the ownership does go on the quarterback. So you hope you don't get to quarterback 3 this year. But if you do, and you have Luke, who's been present the entire season, I think you're still a little bit ahead of where you were last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you trust that if something were to happen to DJ, if he wasn't able to perform up to what we hope and the expectation, he has a couple games where he's really, really struggling, or he gets injured, then you I won't say you have full confidence, but you have a lot more confidence than last year when Brock was our third string quarterback and we were bringing him in and you're like, oh gosh, like let's just not like lose the game against Louisville. I think you have more confidence. He's had a full spring to kind of get through it. I've heard practice reports that, he started the spring really hot. It's kind of cooled now. So, maybe there's still some concern there that he, progressing and learning in that, but you're more confident that you'll be able to do a lot more than you were able to with last season. And then of course, Luke is, that's not to say that Brock isn't the future of that position. Right. Because we've seen what he can do when he's got it on. He's got a lot of moxie. He's got sneaky athleticism. Yeah. We've seen him pull the ball and you're like, oh, boy, got some legs. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not saying that he's not the future or potentially the future, but he's got a hot shot right behind him who has an incredible arm, who has great athleticism. I mean, this is like, Mike Norvell's, I'm not going to say dream quarterback, but it's definitely one up there. And so Luke Kromenhoek is training and growing in that. He's getting in the offense. He's going to learn also with Trevor Jackson as well, coming in as well. So you got some young guys behind Brock and DJ that DJ as the bridge quarterback. And that's not an indictment. That's not a slight to him. It's just what it is. He's going to be a bridge to whoever it starts next year. He can provide great mentorship for them.
100%, man. And regardless of what you think about the quarterback room this year, next year when we do the quarterback preview, man, I'm going to be excited because you're going to have Trammell Jones in there too. And you got the kid from California for 26 that's committed as well. So the future looks bright. You just need somebody you need to allow these guys to get one more year of seasoning. Like I talked about, it's not that Brock isn't great, but DJU has literally 2,500 more snaps than he does. So it's kind of like, just get that 1 year. And I will say that I do think you're going to see the backups, Brock and Luke, given the opportunity. If Florida State can blow a few games open, that Charleston Southern game, I honestly would start Brock Glenn in that game. I think you're going to see them with what happened last year. I think you're going to see them put an emphasis on getting those guys more prepared from a player standpoint, but also where it's like maybe there's not that are they good enough with that guy or not? Like you have some film to turn back to. So I think that's going to be big for them this year. But overall, man, I think DJU is going to be what Florida State needs. And I think if for some reason it's not, or there's an injury concern situation, I think you feel just so much better about your quarterback room as a whole this season than last. And so that's going to do it for this one. I know this one, again, ran a little bit long, got a little bit in depth, but we thought just given the importance of this position and the kind of back and forth surrounding DJ that it was worth diving into. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. And I will just remind you to drop a like and subscribe if you've watched this video and you enjoyed this content, because we're going to obviously be bringing it throughout the season and until kickoff, which is not much farther away. Make sure you check out our friends over at Autograph. Grab that app so you can stay up to date with all of our content, which will be in there. One easy place. You don't even have to go look for it. I'll link to it below, or go to your app store, download it, and use code SPEAR to sign up. So with that being said, guys, we will catch you on the next one, and we'll end this one, as always, with a Go Noles.
Go Noles.